What's up, guys? Welcome back to K's Daily Programming, and in today's video we are going to talk about overloading. And before I start this video, I just want to make one thing clear, that today's video is going to be based in C#, but do take note that this is not a C# based video. This is a concept based video, so hence I'm not going to be teaching you guys the steps of C#, how to write code in C#. I'm going to be teaching you guys a certain concept. So the reason now I'm saying this is the behavior of the concept works the same throughout all the languages that support this concept. So bear in mind that this is not a C# video, but a concept based video. So let's not waste any time and get straight into this. Overloading or function overloading is a feature of object-oriented programming where two or more functions can have the same name but different parameters. Overloading gives us the ability to write function with the same name but accept in different parameters. It can be the same number of parameters but with different data types, or it can be different number of parameters, but as long as the name of the method is the same, that defines the concept of overloading. To give an example, let's just go ahead and write some code. So imagine if we had a function like, let's just write, we want a display function that is void display, and it takes in a parameter of integer, which is a, and this function displays let's just console and then say a is equal to the parameter that we passed. And because this is an overloading, I want to make two functions of the same name but show you the difference between the parameter that it takes in. So let's just go and write our second function. So you just can copy and paste the best invention by mankind. So let's just paste that, and like the definition says, the function has to have different parameters. So when it comes to overloading, always bear in mind that your return type or your access modifier, it pays no contribution to the concept. What we focus on is we focus on the name of the function and the parameter that it takes in. So in this case, I have a method called display, and it takes in a parameter of a, which is a data type of int. So I want to make a second function of the same name, but I want this function to take in, instead of an integer, I want it to take in a string of a. So what's going to happen now is, let me just do this so we can distinguish between the two functions. So we can have something like this. Let's make a new line and say this is the int function, and let's have the same thing on the second function, but let's specify that this is the function that takes in a parameter of integer, sorry, of string. So let's replace that with string. And now if we call this display function, so this is how we're going to call the display function, and we pass in a parameter. So let's just pass in a value of 1. Let me just do this so it doesn't close right after execution. So if we execute this code, so what we expect is we expect it to call the first function, not because it is the first when it comes to line alignment, but because it is the display function that takes in a parameter of integer, and this one takes in a parameter of a string. So it should call this one because it takes in the parameter of integer, and we are passing the value of integer when we call the display function. So let's just go ahead and execute our code. So we can see that our output here, it gave us the parameter that we passed, which is 1, and it says this is the integer function. As I did write a code and say I want to distinguish between the two functions. So you can see that this is the integer function. It's our first function that takes in a parameter of integer. So if we just cancel this, and then we call the very same function, but now we pass in a value of string. let's just put that one in double quotes. So doing that, it converts our value into a string. So if I execute this code now, instead of calling the first method that it called before, I want it to call the second method, because this time I'm not passing in value of integer, but I'm passing through a value of string. So if I execute this, let's just go and execute this code. So now you can see that I'm still getting the same output of A, which is says A is equal to 1, but this time is the line underneath it's saying this is the string function. So this is how the function overload works. So it's the same function with the same name, but it takes in different parameters. Like I said, bear in mind that your access modifiers and your return types, they play no role when it comes to overloading. It can be the same number of parameters but different parameters, or it can be different number of parameters. So in this case, we have two functions that they both take in the same number of parameters, which they take one parameter, but the parameter it's different. This one takes in the parameter of integer, and this one takes in the parameter of a string. You can do this with different number of parameters. So for an example, I can write another display function that will take in let's take in two integers. Let's take in A and B. I just want to get rid of that, and then we display B is equal to, then we say the value of B. And we can also do the same and give it another function that's going to take in 3 parameters. So let's just write another function that's going to take in 3 parameters. So let's name our third parameter C, and then we display C here. So C is equal to, then we do that. So now, if I were to pass a value of 1, that's a value of integer, which is 1. So if I execute this, I expect this code to be called, or this function to execute, because it's the only function, it's the only display function that takes in a single parameter of integer. So if we just do that, we can see that our first function executed, which is this function that says is equal to 1, and this is the int function. But if I pass in 2 values, let's just put 2 there. If I pass in 2 values, now I expect this function here at the bottom, the second last function, this function here to execute, because this function is the only display function that takes in 2 parameters of integers. As you can see, it takes in an integer of A and it takes in an integer of B. So if I execute this, I expect the output that says A is equal to the past value of A and B is equal to the past value of B. So if I execute this, so now you can see that my output says A is equal to 1 and B is equal to 2, which is true because it is the parameters that I gave here when I called the method display. Same as if I introduce a second parameter in there. If I introduce a second parameter, let's just introduce 3. And now when I execute this, I expect this function to be called because it is the only display function that takes in 3 parameters which are A of integer, B of integer, and C of integer. So if I execute that, so now you can see that my output says A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2, and C is equal to 3, which is this function here at the bottom. And same as functions that take in single parameters, you can still overload functions that take in multiple parameters. For an instance, I can do this. Let's just copy this function. And instead of having 3 parameters of integers, I want to make the last parameter in a string. So let's just change that to a string. And now I want to postfix this with the message that tells us that this is the string function. So now if I do this, if I just execute this code like this, it's going to call the function here that does not take the string at the end because I'm passing in all integer values. But if I put that inside double quotes, it converts the last parameter or that parameter to a string variable. So let me just make it something that it's not a numeric value. Let me just put in k. So now if I execute this, I'm passing in two parameters. I'm calling the display method, passing in two parameters. The first parameter is an integer, and these two, actually let's just do this. When I call the display method, so firstly, all the functions here, they're called displayed. So we're going to eliminate each and every function that does not meet the criteria as we move along. So now all the functions, they meet the criteria, but I pass in the value of 1, which is an integer. So looking at this, the second function here, it's eliminated because it does not pass the criteria. It only takes in one parameter of a string. So it takes in the first parameter of it is a string. So this is eliminated. So, and now I go and say, I have a second parameter. So which means this is eliminated as well because it only takes in a single parameter. And now I'm left with these. So now go and say, I have a third parameter. So which means this function here, it's eliminated because it only takes in two parameters. So looking at these two last functions, they both take 3 parameters. But the first one takes in all parameters of integers, and the last one takes in 2 parameters, the 2 first parameters of integers, and the last parameter of a string. So which means this is eliminated. And if I execute this code, I expect this function to be called. So let's just go ahead and run that and just to prove it. So now we can see that the display here is coming from our last function here, which is this function that we wrote that takes in 2 parameters of a, which is int, b, which is int, and a c of a string. So one of the examples that we use daily when it comes to overloading, it is an example of a substring. So let me just give you an example of something like this. Let's say maybe you had a name, you had a value of a variable of name, the string name is equal to k. And imagine if you wanted the first string or the first character of your name. So what you do is you would say, let's say console write, and then we say our name dot, and we use the substring function. So if you click on the substring function, it will give you these two options here. And then if you scroll through these two options, it will tell you that the first one here, you can see it says 1 of 2. So it tells you that the first function here, it takes in a single parameter of integer, which is the start index. And if you scroll down, it will tell you that there's an overload function of that, the second function, which it takes in 2 parameters of integers, the start index and the length. So now if you just do that and you say, let's call the first one, and let's just write the console read line so it doesn't shut out after execution, and then we execute that. So what we expect is we expect the output to start from the index of 1, because if you remember, the first function that says takes 1 parameter, it was the start index. So if I just go back to this, first function that takes in 1 parameter is the start index function. So the second function, it takes in the start index and the length. So now if I just do that and give it a, let's do that and give this, let's say 0.1. So we gave it the start index and the length. So what should happen now is I'm expecting the output here of k, which is the first index and only 1 length. So let's just execute this. So now you can see that the first function, it gave us ay, and the second one here, it gave us k. So this is an example of overloading. Like I said, overloading gives us the functionality or the ability to write functions with the same name but accept in different parameters. So that was it for today's video. If you guys have watched this far, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.